Hi everyone, it's Tamara here with another card making tutorial. This is my final installment in the Penny and her friends Halloween ACT set. I'll be doing some COPIC colouring of two of the images and then utilising the ink blended backgrounds from the last tutorial to create a couple of new backgrounds for these cards. So let's get started. So I've got all my items ready to go. I've already printed out my images onto some Copic Express It cardstock. So I'll be using the little ghost and the little demon for this particular tutorial. I've got my previous ink blended panels and my black ACT bases. And then I've got some of these dies ready for my background panels from La La Land Crafts. Now there's not much skin showing for this little ghost, it's only his little hand here, so I'm just going to be doing some quick colouring of this, and because it's quite small I'm going to go in with the darkest colour first and then blend that out with all the other colours. All my colours will be up in the top left hand corner, but also written in the description box below. Now I do want this sheet to look white but have like a little soft glow, but we've got to make sure that we're adding some of our shadows in so that it does actually look like it has been coloured. So I'm just going in with my darkest colour, which is going to be my C3, to add all my shadows. Obviously his little glasses will be throwing some shadows, as well as all the folds in that sheet, and also his little lolly jar will be throwing a shadow as well. So now I'm just going to blend that out with my C1. So I'm just kind of slowly working out where those shadows are with the C3 and blending that out with our C1, making sure I don't forget underneath those glasses and up around that top fold. Our next color will be C00 to blend out that C1. I'm just slowly flicking out, going into that white card space, and I'm just putting a little bit of color where that is going to be in a little bit of shadow on that side of his little arm. And also finally going in with our BG00 to add that kind of like little bluish glow that I want coming off this little ghost. So I'm just working out with those C markers with that BG00. And then to make sure I blend that out nicely, I'm just going to bring that C00 marker in just to soften that blue. Working up, but still leaving a lot of white cardstock so that it does look like it is a white sheet. And then just to make sure I've got nice soft edges, I'm just going to blend that out with the Colorless Blender and just flicking out into that white cardstock. Now there's also a little bit of color that I missed under these glasses, so I'm just going to use the C1 marker, C00, and then go over with that BG00 so that it looks kind of like glass there. Now again, there's not a lot of room on these pants, so I'm just going in with the darkest color first, the B99, blending that out with the B97 and then the B95. And our final color in this will be the B93, so that it looks like a jeans kind of pants that he's wearing. And now for his shoes, I'm just going with brown shoes, E39, blending out with E37. Bringing that out again with the E35, and then our final color in this combo will be the E33 as our highlight color. Now I'm just going to add just a little bit of the skin colors just in his shoes to finish those little bases of his shoes off. And then we've just got his pumpkin to do. So I'm going in again with the darkest color because this is quite a small image, because it is going to fit on our ACT card. I'm doing a bit of tip to tip to blend out that E09, and then come in with the Y15 and the Y12. This is the same color scheme that I used with our last little lolly bucket. Now we're going to color up our demon. So I'm just going in with my lightest skin color, which is going to be our E31, and just work out where all my shadows are going to be. This little demon has a little bit more skin showing than our ghost did. Now I'm going in with the darkest color. Now I've worked out my shadows, which is going to be our E37. So we see flicking up between those fingers and at the bottom of his hands, blending that out with our E35. And obviously his nose will throw a little bit of shadow, and where his hands tucked over, blend that out with our E33 and go into leaving that highlight space, which will be our E31, and I almost forgot his ear there. So now we've got our skin tone done. We'll finish off on those hands, and then we'll get his hair coloured up. So I'm going to still use the E35, that's going to be our lightest colour, and just work out where all my shadows are going to be. So I'm just using little flicking motions, and our darkest colour with our E79, so only a small amount of this colour, and just flicking out into our highlight space. And then for her next colour, it's E57, flicking down and flicking out that little hair at the base. And then we'll bring back in our final colour, which was our original colour, the E35. And I'm just leaving some white showing so that it does look like there's a nice shine to her hair as well. Now her outfit I'm going to be doing in grey, so I'm going to be using N8. So I'm going in with the darkest colour and just adding all my shadows. I'm going to do her wings a different colour, but her outfit will be in the greys. So I'm just going to be working around where obviously the little folds in her top will be in shadow, at the back of her little outfit will be in shadow, and obviously where any kind of folds or flaps are on her little outfit will be in shadow as well. We're going to blend that out with the next colour in our sequence, N6. Just slowly working up into our white cardstock, just using little flicking motions to get a nice blend. Then our next colour will be our N4, and then we'll have one final colour after that, which is going to be our N2. So our final colour, I forgot a little skirt under here to her hand, which will obviously be in shadow from her hand. And then our N2 is our final colour. Now I did miss a little bit on the bottom of the skirt, and I want to reinforce all our shadows. So I'm going to go back in with all those markers again. So starting off with that N8, going over where I initially put all the shadows in. So around her arm wasn't too bad. So some of the spots you might not need to go over, but just use where you think that it needs that extra bit of contrast. So I'm coming in with my N6 to blend out the N8, and not forgetting that bottom of that skirt now. And then we'll bring in our N4 to blend that N6 out. Just slowly working into our highlight. So I'm kind of got the light coming from the top left-hand side. And then we'll bring in our highlight colour, the N2, to finish off that blend, and just go over, making sure we've got a nice smooth blend between all of those greys. Now we want to add our little colour. Actually, we'll go in and add all our end markers while we've got our pens out. So I've got our N8 again, just putting shadows. I'm going to do her little trudgeon here, and her tail, as well as her boots, are all going to be in our grey markers. So obviously anything on the kind of right hand side will be in shadow, as our light's coming from the left. And we'll bring in our N4. I did forget her headband, so I'm going to bring in our N8 and colour that up, blend that out with the N6. And now we can finish off with our N4 that we were just using before, and leaving our little highlight for our N2. Just do that little, finish that pitchfork, and then our N2 will finish off her little headband and her shoes. There's not a lot of space on that tail, so I just use 3 markers on that. Now with the wings, or that little kind of wing cape, I'm going to bring in our purple markers. So I've got BV08 is going to be my darkest colour. And I'm going to add a few little highlights to a few of the accessories, so a little belt and the little clips that hold her cape on, and blend that out with the V17. And don't forget her little leggings. And then our final colour in this combo will be our V04. And just finalising that. I did forget that little belt, but I will come back in now and go over everything again. So reinforcing those shadows with that darkest marker, the BV08. See where that cape goes over the inside will be in darkness. Flick out that little belt and then blend out with our V17. I'm going to add some purple highlight to the top of that wing as well with the V markers, and just to make sure we've got a nice smooth blend, because there is a little bit of space between the 17 and the V04, and get that nice and blended, and not forget that edge of that wing. Now I'm going to use the same markers for some of the highlights on her little outfit and her horns, as well as the same colors for our lolly holder. So I'm now going to just do some tip to tip with the E09 and the YR68 to blend all of those out. So trying to keep this as simple as possible and use the same colors so that we're not grabbing out a heap of markers. Blend that out with the YR15, including her socks, and then the final color in that combo again is the YR12 to fully blend that out. The little fire on the front and that little lolly holder and her socks. Now obviously we want to add some color to her teeth and to that little plaque that she had on her outfit, and finish off her mouth and tongue. So just only a small amount of colours because it is quite small. And I also just forgot the bottom of her boots, so I'm just going to use those same colours that I'd used previously. So now all our colouring's finished. We'll do our die cutting of our background pieces. So I've got this kind of scary gate that will be on the back of our little demon, and then the spooky tree from La La Land Crafts that will be behind our ghost. So I've run that through, and I'm just going to pull that out, and we'll get the eyes and mouth out. So I did that with the pick, and now I'm going to use the pick to get rid of all those little inserts in those little gates. So it just helps push them out, makes it easier to get into those little tight spots. So we've pulled that all out, ready to go for our background. So I'll be using 2 stamp sets today for our sentiments. So Beware will be for our little demon, and Boo will be for our little ghost. So I've got my Misti and a piece of black cardstock, and grab out our little sentiments that we'll be using. So one at the top, one at the bottom, so we can cut them into little strips. So attach them to our front of a Misti door and prep up our cardstock with our anti-static powder tool. And then I'm going to use my Versa Watermark ink to stamp them up. So I'll give them one stamp and press down. And then to make sure I've got a good impression, I'll just dab on a bit more of that ink. And we'll pull that out, and our folded piece of printer paper to catch our excess white heat embossing powder. Sprinkle that on over the top of our folded paper. Give it a tap off of any excess. And then I've preheated my heat tool. Go into the back first to make sure we get rid of any little stray particles, and then go to the front till nice and melted. And when that's dry, I just grab out my cloth just to wipe off that excess anti-static powder. Now I've just grabbed out my tonic trimmer and just cut those 2 pieces in half so I can get this cut up into little strips. So I find it easier when you're working with small little sentiments to go either end first to get that size that you want, and then we can trim up the top and bottom to size, just making sure it's even on all 4 sides. And I'm finding hard to get that out. So we've got our Boo done, and we'll do the same for our Beware. So one on each end, and then we'll make sure that we go top and bottom to get that into a nice sentiment strip, and lining that up with the little grid lines to make sure we're cutting that straight as well. Now I'm going to pop some foam squares and tape on the back of our sentiment and our image. But before I stick on our ink blended panel to the front, I'm going to get our little scary tree glued down first. So I'm just lining up where I want that to be sitting, so where I'll need my glue. So I'm only needing it on that kind of left hand side, which is the right hand side when you flip it over. So I've got my glue ready. Just put on a little bit on all the edges that are going to be sitting on that panel. Get that lined up and pressed down. Now once that's dry, I'm going to get our little grass panel put on. So I'm going to grab out a pencil and just mark where I need to put my glue. So we're not putting too much glue on and maybe getting glue on your surface. And so I put a little bit of glue down the bottom and just using my little precision glue tool to get a little bit more glue put on those little blades of grass because they're quite small and intricate. I'm lining that up with our panel. Give that a press down and we'll set that aside to dry before we'll turn that over to trim up the edges. Now I'm going to get our little foam squares. So I'm using black for our black little sentiment so that it stays kind of hidden when it's on your card. I'm going to just use some foam tape to go on the back of our little ghost. Now that our little back panel is dry, I'm going to trim those up to get rid of anything excess hanging over the edges. And now we'll get our little panel glued onto our base of our ACT card. So I'm just making sure we're getting a nice even amount over that panel. Line that up inside the stitch lines in our ACT base to make sure it's nice and even on all four sides. And then I'll set that under a book while we work on our other panel. And I've already done off screen the foam tape and foam squares on the back of our image and sentiment. And I'm just going to line up now where I want those gates to sit and where our grass will sit over the top. So off camera, I'll put on some glue. You don't need to see me putting that on. I'm sure you know how to do that. And we'll get that attached on the left-hand side, kind of very close to that edge, and do the same for our right-hand side, lining those gates up evenly. Then I've already kind of put on the glue on our grass, and we'll just get that at the base of our card. And again, set that aside to dry to trim off the edges. And get that base put onto our black card base. So I got some glue on my finger, so be very careful because it did leave a mark on my ink blended panel. So now I've decided that's the perfect spot for our sentiment to sit. So sometimes you'll need to cover things up like that if you happen to put your fingers where you shouldn't. Now I've taken off all the release paper, so I'm just going to pop on our sentiment before I stick down our ghost to make sure I've got enough room. And now we'll flip over our sentiment and get that attached to the top as well. And we'll do our same for our little demon, but I'm going to make sure I'm putting our sentiment over that little spot that I made on our ink blended panel. So that's covered that up nicely. And we'll get our demon attached to the front. Now with the glasses, I always like to put a little bit of Glossy Accents. So I'm just making that filled in on those little round spectacles. And then I thought the lolly containers will be plastic as well. So I wanted to add a little bit of Glossy Accents to those, just to create a little bit of interest to our little ACT cards. And then I thought these horns would be plastic as well, so I popped a little bit of that on there. Now I did go out a little bit on these horns, so I just grabbed this little kind of tool that I have. It's a little picker up, and I'm easily able to wipe that excess off of that Glossy Accents. And these are the finished ACT cards for this tutorial. Now I did leave these overnight to dry with the Glossy Accents. They do dry in a few hours, but I like to make sure they're nice and dry. And you can just see that like added shine that it gives to those plastic pieces or the glasses. And I also did it to our little lolly holder for our vampire as well, to make sure that they all match in nicely together. So now we'll get all our little ACT cards in our book that we made originally. And this is the finished project, and this will be going off to someone that has said that they really like it. So I'm going to make sure that they receive it to add to their collection of ACT cards. I hope you've enjoyed this card making tutorial. This was such a fun project to make. If you have, please hit the like button. And if you'd like to see any future videos, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.